Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We are back with a live reaction to the NBA season finale, pretty much. You know, we had a Game 7. I'm sure everybody knows the result, but we're here to break it down, talk about it, give our live reaction, all that stuff. So, before we do get started with that, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates. And Chris, please take it away.
Yes, so the Oklahoma City Thunder are your NBA champions for 2025. They defeated the Indiana Pacers in 7 games. Tonight, obviously, was the final Game 7. Obviously, the first thing we want to do is we want to, throw our support out for Tyrese Halliburton because he tore his Achilles in the first half of that game. Looked like he was on track to have a huge Game 7. 9 quick points in 7 minutes, including 3 threes. And then, unfortunately, we've seen that before, right? Where a guy has untamed. What's up, guys? What's up, boys? What's up? Man? Serious question. If the Lakers count 5 mini chips, why isn't OKC counting this as a second chip? Seattle wanted 79. I don't know. I guess for whatever reason, they don't count the Seattle history. I think that's just their team thing. That's what they decide to do. I'm not really sure why, but that's just what they choose to do. So this is the first one for their franchise, right? I think they didn't take their previous team's history with them. And some teams, I guess, don't do that, and then others do. Like, I guess, think of another one, I guess. Like, say, the Sacramento Kings, right? They were in Cincinnati. It wasn't an expansion team, so I'm counted as 2. Yeah. It's different for each team, and you do wonder why, but that's what they decide to do. But, for but this was kind of something that, in some ways, sucked a lot of the excitement out of the game, right? It was still a back-and-forth game for a while. But obviously, Halliburton was looking like he was going to have a huge game. Then he gets hurt, tears his Achilles, right? I don't think Shams has put it out, but it has been put out there because I believe Halliburton's father said it. And you could see the injury. You could kind of tell when it happened what it was. It was pretty bad. It's awful. But, you do give credit to the Pacers for battling, for trying to tough it out. You kind of figured that they probably weren't going to win, but you were waiting for them to kind of fall apart, and they didn't. They never did. Prayers up to the 3 number zeros, man. Terrible run. Yeah, I did see that, where all of those guys that, wear number 0 as their jersey, right? Dame, Tatum, and Halliburton. Yeah, they all did tear their Achilles. Yeah, that's pretty awful, and it does have some big ramifications for the Eastern Conference, right? Because all 3 of those guys are in the East, and they're all on teams that, or at least 2 out of the 3 teams, right, had a real chance to win the title this year, right? Because we saw Boston. Obviously, they lost to New York in 6, right? They blew the first 2 games at home, and then obviously, even though they were probably going to lose that game anyways with him, they had no chance once Tatum tore his Achilles. And then with Halliburton, right, you're right there, Game 7. 1 win away from the finals. He did hurt his calf earlier in the series, Game 5, still played through it, tried to gut it out. And this is kind of the tough part because we saw this right with Kevin Durant, right, who I guess we'll probably talk about at some point after this, right? He tore his Achilles, right, in a similar way where he missed the first, 4 games of that finals against the Raptors, right, because he had the calf injury. And I think he missed some games before that because he got hurt against Houston. Didn't sat out in the final couple of closeout games against the Rockets, then didn't play in the Blazers series, then comes back in the Raptors series. Then in that game, right, to avoid going down 3-1 they were already down 3-1. It was to avoid going home. He comes in and plays and then gets hurt in the first 10, 12 minutes. And then boom, his Achilles is torn and he's out for all of the following season, right? And, since that point, he's kind of had up and down moments with his injuries. But it is tough. But obviously, you do want to start off from the Oklahoma City perspective in terms of the actual game, right? Where you could tell early on, guys were nervous, guys were tight. SGA was kind of offensively in the first part of the game, really the only guy that was kind of showing up. You were getting kind of some donuts from a lot of other players out there. And defensively, they were there, right? But the offense was really struggling for a while, right? SGA was really the only guy who could really create anything. And the thing is that despite all that, he actually was still getting a number of assists, right? And still generating good offense, even with the offense looking pretty ugly for a decent chunk of it. And the Pacers, like I said, were playing hard on both ends of the floor, finding ways to attack and score, right? Siakam, Nembhard, even, I guess McConnell, right, had that stretch in the third quarter, right? But then obviously the third quarter happened And that was kind of the do or die moment, right? Because Nembhard took that, made that big three at the end of the first half. And then eventually it would just became too much, right? Where Oklahoma City's defense, as it's done all year, swallowed guys up, forced a ton of turnovers. And by that point, there wasn't really a whole lot the Pacers could do, right? I think McConnell had 7, right? And a lot of those came in that stretch in the third quarter, even though he was scoring. Siakam had a stretch where he was just out in the third quarter, which was kind of bizarre because you kind of wondered, like, hey, you need somebody else other than McConnell if you want a real chance to win. But even then, for Oklahoma City, eventually in the second half, other guys came to play. Chet had a big game 7, which we talked about in our regular episode that wasn't a live stream, that he needed to show up in this game, not just on defense, but offensively, he needed to have an impact. And he did. He had 18 and 8. And, when you looked at some of the role players you needed, we thought you kind of needed somebody to have like a 4-5-3 game, but it was kind of collective, right? Because you had Caruso with a couple of threes, Cason Wallace with a couple of threes. You didn't know what to expect from him because he hadn't done much in this series. You had Lou Dort, 3 for 10, 2 of 9, but had a bunch of offensive rebounds, a number of steals. And, again, Jalen Williams, right, with 20 and 4, mostly in the second half. But defensively, like I said, that third quarter stretch, which is what we've seen, where every time it's kind of a close game, they end up running the other team out of the gym with the stops. Let's see for Untamed. Obviously, knowing the outcome of today, I just wish OKC would have won game 6. I mean, yeah, but a lot of times that's not always how that happens. And I said that for game 6, I wanted it to end less risk. Chet 5 blocks felt huge today. Yeah, because, he had a few blocks in the fourth quarter where Indiana had one last gasp to come back, right? Because Oklahoma City kind of went back to that, offense where the ball's not really moving. And there was a lot of just poor shot selections. And they were getting Indiana back into the game. But Chet was able to kind of get some stops at the rim, get some offensive rebounds. But yeah, that's kind of one of the reasons why you would prefer to close it out in 6. But it's hard to beat a team that's desperate as Indiana was in that game. Like when you watch that game, Indiana came to play. They knew that their season was going to end, and they needed to get it back to Oklahoma City for a game 7 to have a chance to win. And that can be very tough to match. And Oklahoma City's not the only team in a playoff setting, in a championship run, that we've seen do that. Like sometimes teams just kind of take their foot off the gas because they'll be like, well, we have game 7, but it's a dangerous game because obviously, Halliburton gets hurt and the Pacers were in this game for a while. And you just do kind of wonder, hey, if he hadn't gotten hurt, you never know. Indiana may have been able to pull out the win. But at the end of the day, with Oklahoma City, you have to win. You have to play who's in front of you. This isn't the first time we've seen things like that, right? Boston last year, right, had a number of teams that they were able to beat. And that's kind of the key to winning the title. In addition to being really good and dominant, you also have to be healthy. And that in and of itself, right, takes a lot because not every team can really do that. And for Oklahoma City, it just caps off, right, a great season because you won 68 games in the regular season, right? Then you go, 16 and 7 in the playoffs. So basically, 84 and 21. So the 2 game 7s probably for a lot of people may take away the all-time great team status for them. But I think a lot of people will probably say that, but it is still a great team. But more importantly, for SGA, right, that's one of the great individual seasons because you got the Triple Crown with the title, the MVP, and the Finals MVP. We haven't had a season like that in quite some time. I think the last person to pull that off, right, was LeBron because I think he did it with the Heat, right? Because Steph, he won the MVP and the title, but he didn't get the Finals MVP in 2015. It went to Iguodala for whatever reason. But that's kind of the big thing here is for Oklahoma City, the identity of this team was defense, and that was the key to their win in this game because that defense in the third quarter was what allowed them to pull away and actually make it to the point where Oklahoma City was in the driver's seat the rest of the way. But it was dicey, right? But that's kind of the nice thing about having your defense when you're locked in is your defense should almost always be consistent, right? Offense can come and go, but your defense should, from start to finish, always be there. And that's what we saw. It got better and better as the game went on. Congrats to OKC, man. Sam Presti did it. Yeah, and now he is certified in terms of one of the great GMs in the NBA, right? Because that was the only thing missing for him was the title because we knew he had the talent to be able to find a lot of players, right? Again, you look at this team, yeah, they do have, guys like Chet, who was, a number 2 pick in the draft, but you traded for SGA, right? Who was not a number 2 pick, right? And even though people liked him, we didn't know that he was going to be this awesome. And then even a guy like Jalen Williams, you got him towards the lower part of the lottery. Lou Dort was undrafted. Obviously we knew what Caruso was. We had seen him on other teams. They traded for him. Cason Wallace, right? That was another guy that they grabbed last year. And they still have other guys in wait, right? Like there were guys who didn't really play much in this series that maybe a couple seasons from now, they'll be main rotation. Maybe an AJ Mitchell, Nikola Topic, right? Who couldn't even play this year because of the ACL, right? We'll see what happens because that's probably what they're going to have to do because like Untamed said, those guys are young and the apron will make an impact for this team because they're probably not going to be able to keep every single player, but you don't have to worry about that for now because even next year, Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren will still be in the last year of their rookie deal, so they'll probably extend them, I'm sure, give them max contracts, but the contracts won't actually kick in for another season, and no one else really on this roster is really up for, another contract other than SGA. He'll get his supermax extension, but again, that won't kick in until later. Everyone else is on a pretty small contract other than Hartenstein, who they have for 3 years. So Oklahoma City's pretty much poised to continue to contend and compete for titles for now and at least for the next couple of seasons, right? The next couple of seasons, this team probably shouldn't change much. It's all about continuing to stay healthy, continuing to have these young guys improve, right? Hopefully, maybe one of these other guys will improve and become another ball handler because it does feel like they need somebody, right, in that second unit who can probably help them out there. And all this experience for this team, right? The youngest team in the league this season, the second youngest team in the finals, right now, one of the youngest teams ever to win a title. So this is a great experience for them going forward. So now we'll see how this team continues to progress and develop and see if they potentially have a chance to break the streak of teams not being able to win back-to-back. Can they break the streak? Can they set up a dynasty? Not sure, but over the course of this entire postseason, you've seen a lot of the best parts of Oklahoma City as to why everybody was so high on them going into the season. You saw some low points where the doubters kind of felt a little bit justified at different points, right, with the offense and different performances from guys. But overall, it ends in a title. Can't really ask for much better than that. And again, it caps off a great season for their team and for their players.
Yeah, for sure. And, you do have to shout out Oklahoma City because they've been building something, for a long time. This is a long time coming, right? And, the quickness, though, for this specific rebuild is very interesting, right? A few seasons ago, they were not, a very good team, but that's, what comes with a guy like Sam Presti when you build pretty much, your core and you have that, ready to go kind of out the gate. And then you bring in all these, role players and guys who really do, fit the mold of, the prototypical, title team. Like it's phenomenal. They're deep in so many aspects, and you have Shea, and I think that's obviously the catalyst. But having J-Dub and Chet also helps you so much. Like and I love the fact that all three of these guys are so versatile on the defensive end, right? Like they're so switchable, and that's what makes this team special. Yeah, the offense is cool. Like Shea being a hub is awesome, but defensively, that's their bread and butter. And I think as long as that, continues, they'll be good for the long run, right? Like I know we say this every time, there's a title winner, like, we always talk about it, right? But they could be the next dynasty. Like there's a legit case for them, right? You already talked about it. Contract wise, it makes sense. The young guys, they'll be there for a while. And yeah, like Untamed said, there's a lot of guys that, can be expendable and easily replaceable as well. So, it is interesting. Katie and the Rockets got their work cut out for them. Yeah, that's an interesting story. But yeah, shout out to Oklahoma City, man, because a lot of people didn't believe in them. I think you and I were firm believers pretty much from the beginning of the season. Thought they would represent the Western Conference. Thought that they probably wouldn't lose in any 7-game series, but it wouldn't have surprised us if some of their series went to 7 games because of the lack of experience, the offensive woes, whatever you want to blame it on. Yeah, for sure. So that happened. But yeah, shout out to Oklahoma City. We knew they were coming out of the West. I think that was pretty much a given, unless you were, kind of hating. But what a way to cap off a dominant season, all around, team wise and individually for SGA. I don't think you could have really wrote it too much better, right?
Right. Yeah. Scoring champ and MVP and the NBA title. Not many players have been able to do that.
Right.
Right. And also at the age, right? He's what, 26, 27, guilty
Mhm.
of hating right here. Ha ha. But I get it. You're not alone. And I don't necessarily think that it was completely ridiculous or out of bounds for somebody to feel that way because you don't normally see teams this young win it all, right? You don't normally see guys that are like, 26, 27 with a super young team usually win it all, right? Usually it's at least, we know that 26, 27 is when guys get to enter their prime because we've seen a lot of players be able to do stuff like that, right? Tatum got the title last year. I think LeBron's first title, he was around 27. um, Even Jordan, bunch of other guys, same thing, right? It depends on the situation you're in because sometimes you come into a good situation, sometimes you make it a good situation, right? But either way, like I said, I can't blame people for feeling that way, especially because we've seen in the past some teams in the regular season just look different than they in the playoffs, right? And even Oklahoma City, right? They had the best point differential of all time in the regular season, right? But in the playoffs, right, it looked like that at home, right? But you wouldn't guess it on the road because on the road they were kind of an average team, right? Because they had a number of losses on the road where, you kind of watch them play and the offense just kind of bogs down. It looks ugly. And you're kind of just wondering, it's basically SGA and a bunch of other random guys. Um, so, like I said, I can't really it's not like I'm going to be like, oh, you guys are insane. But we also have seen in the NBA, a lot of times, usually one of the best teams in terms of net rating and in terms of the record has tended to win it all. We haven't really had a lot of shocker surprises, right? We haven't had like a 7 seed win the championship, right? I don't even know if that's even happened, right? But like we don't normally have that. It's usually like a 50+ win team and usually one of the best teams in the league. You can see it early, and you saw Oklahoma City early looked like a championship team. But, at the same time, it is what it is. Let's see. So is Hallie a superstar in your opinions? I say he's borderline, but not quite. They suck so bad today after he went down. I mean, a game like this is kind of evident of what can make him a superstar, just from the perspective of when he was out there, right? They had the lead and they looked like they had a good shot of taking it, right? And then once he got hurt, obviously they still kept, they were right there with Oklahoma City. But, as it got later on down the stretch, they needed him, right? It was kind of like game 4, which is probably the game where if you're Indiana, that's the one that you're going to have nightmares about for a long time because they had that game. They were up, by 4 with 3 minutes to go, and they just could not score the rest of the way. And they could have gone up 3-1 with that win, right? And uh, in game 5, right, that was the game where Hallie was bad, but he had the injury. And even then, it was a 2-point game. And then you needed Halliburton probably to be really good in order for them to steal that game, but he couldn't. He wasn't able to summon that because he was hurt. Spencer Dinwiddie said it best: "I'm here, we win. I'm not here, we lose." That's the definition of a superstar. Again, over the course of the playoffs and in these series, I think it's kind of hard to not have a ton of respect for Tyrese Halliburton just because of the fact that the run he was able to go on, all the big shots he was able to make, right? Making all these guys even better than they are, right? Because when he was out there, by and large, that was when they were out there at their best. This entire postseason, they do have a lot of depth. They did have stretches where they were able to get back into games and or extend leads when he was off the floor. But he's a different type of superstar from other guys, right? Because his greatest skill isn't necessarily his scoring, right? Like, he's not usually a guy that's going to have like 30 points and 5 assists, right? Even in his highest scoring games, he usually has a ton of assists. And it's not even about all the assists, right? It's the ball movement. He kind of gets them to play the style of basketball that he wants to play. And that's the best thing for the team, right? You don't necessarily there are certain parts of his game where it's like, yeah, that's why he's probably not going to average 30 points a game over the course of a season. But for the Pacers, they've gotten this far and they didn't need it. So, but I understand the borderline thought process, but not quite, just because his floor feels like it's lower than some other superstars, right? Like and obviously game 5, he was hurt, right? But, even before that series, some of the games where the Pacers lost in the earlier rounds, right? That's where you kind of look at it and you're like, it's different, right? So say like, I don't know, an SGA, right? They're both point guards, right? SGA is considered the superstar, right? The floor for SGA, a bad game for him is going to look different than a bad Halliburton, right? Because SGA is probably not normally going to, have like an 8-point game where he's like, 2 for 11 or something like that. Obviously, he can have games where he doesn't shoot well, but it's a different type of player. He's comparable to Nash, if anything, but personally, Suns Nash was way more fun to watch. That's interesting. I mean, I guess the personnel for the Suns was a little bit different, right? Because like you had Marion, you had Stoudemire, so I guess you had a little bit more athleticism with some of those teams. Different era too, right? Because I don't think there was really anything like the Suns at that time. I guess there's not really much like the Pacers at this time, but I get it. But either way, I do think that this series, this postseason showed, yeah, he's a superstar. But we talked about it in terms of like, is he top 10? Is he top 5 or whatever? I think we kind of were at the point where it's like, if he's top 10, he's probably like right at the bottom, or maybe like 11, 12, somewhere around that range. But to be honest, once you get past the top 5, there's not a whole lot of a gap between 6 and later, right? Like, there's a lot of guys where they're kind of in a similar tier.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a superstar. There's no question about it, no doubt in my mind. The things that he's able to do, I
Right.
think, he's a top 3. I know the term supercomputer has been tossed around, right? I think he's a top 3 supercomputer up there with Braun, Luka, and himself. So, I think that kind of, puts him in that category, right? And yeah, he's not like a top tier superstar, right? Like he's not top 5 in the league, right? Like, and that his game just wouldn't translate to that. But what his game does translate to is winning, and I think that's a huge, factor, right? Because look at it, Indiana was not supposed to be here, in terms of people thinking who's going to come out of the East and whatnot, right? But the reason that they were here,
Every series,
exactly, us included. So it's like shout out to Indiana and shout out to Halliburton because yeah, he's super underrated and overhated for sure, but he's definitely top 10 in my opinion. Like look at what he does, not even beyond, like just look beyond the numbers, right? I think it's more of an impact thing. I think the way that he impacts the game, the way that he can read and influence it, like you said, that's the thing. Like he can really dictate, how a game is going to be played, from his team's perspective.
yeah, and it's hard to do that without being a top 10, right? Like say, look at the way McConnell was doing it, which was still effective, right? But it's just different, with Halliburton out there. But again, the last couple of games he wasn't physically able to be at his best. I think we had seen, in some of the previous rounds what the best games of him can be, even though that's not necessarily every game.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would in that tier. He just would, like I said, probably be in the bottom tier, the lower tier, where I think just the floor might be a little bit lower than some of the other ones. But again, he, like you said, he impacts winning. Like, I mean, they wouldn't get anywhere close to this stage without him.
No.
And again, there's an argument to be made that if he plays, maybe they win this game. We'll never know. And you can say that about a lot of previous finals and series, which is why I don't really like putting asterisks on titles or series at all. I don't really like doing that.
And we don't.
Yeah, we don't. So yeah, that's the other thing. We don't do that here. But for Indiana, it's just, I think the respect for this team has gone up so much because I remember last year, right? The conversation coming out of the conference finals was everybody was impressed by their run. Everybody was, really pleased, because there were a lot of people who liked Indiana going into that season. You assumed they would be better, but not necessarily conference finals. Obviously, they made the trade for Siakam, which catapulted them into another tier. But then I think going into the season, I think most people felt like run was a little bit fluky because of all the injuries that they, got to play against. What are they going to do this season, right? They ran it back. They didn't really make any significant changes. And, you did have a lot of people taking victory laps earlier in the season because they struggled early in the year. But then for whatever reason, they kicked it into high gear. Once they got to January, the defense got much, much, much better. And that's kind of what was able to get them to this point, right? Because you already had a good offensive floor for the most part because of Halliburton and the guys around him. But the defense was really the problem for Indiana, which is why they couldn't necessarily just, get over the hump, even against Boston, right? They couldn't get stops. But now they can defend, and that's what allows them to kind of be in that upper tier of Eastern Conference teams. Now, obviously, with the Halliburton injury, that it definitely does change the trajectory of what the Pacers can do for next season because we don't know when he'll be back, right? I think you got to assume with the injury in late June, probably doesn't play much of next year, if at all. So for the Pacers, that's unfortunate and that's rough because that probably takes them out of, like the Celtics, it probably takes them out of title contention for next year, even though because it's the East, you could still be a playoff team. You could still be, a good team, but probably not a championship team, right? Pacers, Celtics, Bucks, no shot next season. And yeah, that's the wild thing about the East is that for the Pacers, right? You made a huge run, but that's the tough part about losing a game 7 because just getting to the finals, let alone winning it, is hard. And you pushed the best team in the league to a game 7, right? Where they could have lost this game
Mhm.
100%. This was basically a coin flip game going into the half, right? I think you kind of assumed without Halliburton, the Pacers eventually would kind of fall apart. But, with Halliburton in the game, with the way he was playing and how aggressive he was being, they could have stolen that game. But now you have the Halliburton Achilles injury, and that takes them out of contention, right? So now if you're a team in the Eastern Conference, right, that's why, like, if you're the Magic, that's why you make a move like the Desmond Bane deal, right? Because, not expecting them to get to the finals or anything, but, they could be a team that maybe wins multiple rounds and maybe, who knows, gets to the conference finals or whatever happens right from here on out, right? But Pacers, Celtics, Bucks, all those teams have key guys that are going to be out for next season, right? With the Giannis thing, seems like he's probably not going anywhere, at least right now. We'll see what happens with the Bucks. But, for some of these other teams, like say Cleveland, you had a pretty bad showing in that second round matchup. But hey, you could make the case there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to make it out of the East here, right? And
Yeah.
then, you look at some of these other teams in the Eastern Conference, right? Like the Knicks. They could look at themselves and be like, hey, we don't need to drastically change our roster because, we got to the conference finals and the team that kicked our butts the last couple of seasons won't be as good next year. So that's how you have to look at it, I guess, if you're one of those teams. Untamed says he believes the Bane trade was overpay. I'm assuming overpay for the Magic.
I mean, I thought it was kind of a win-win. I think the Magic were in a position where you have your franchise guy, you have a great complement to that in Franz, and then now you go out and get, another good complement, which is exactly kind of what they were needing, a lot of shooting, of potential playmaking, because Bane's gotten better every single year he's been in the league. Like, you can't doubt that. So I would assume it either, plateaus or continues, which is a pretty good plateau. So, I think it's a good fit, and you mortgage a little bit of your future away for that, and I think it's a win-win because I think Memphis probably wanted a lot of future in return, and then you get rid of the KCP contract. That doesn't look too bad anymore from your perspective. So I mean, like, there are trade-offs for sure for both sides, but I think it'll work out in the long run. Like, I don't think Orlando will be kicking themselves for making that trade. I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I
Yeah.
think we both thought when we covered that trade in one of our last episodes, we felt that way. But I guess getting back to the Thunder, right? SJ in the finals gave you a little over 30 points, little under 6 assists, 4.5 rebounds, right? 2 steals, 44 from the field, right? And again, that was I think we both kind of felt like when we were talking about Finals MVP, right? If Oklahoma City won, it was going to be SGA, and then for Indiana, probably Siakam, maybe Halliburton if he had had a big game 7. But, again, that puts him in, elite company. He's actually specifically the 11th player to win league MVP and finals MVP in the same season. So other guys, Willis Reed, Kareem, Moses Malone, Larry Bird, Magic, Jordan, Elijah Wan, Shaq, Duncan, and LeBron. So that's some pretty elite company right there. And
Hmm.
he's just what, 26, 27 years old.
Yeah.
So, and it may not be done.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like, really thinking about it, he's really racking up a lot of individual accolades alongside, the the great team success, and that's beautiful to see, really.
Yeah. Even if they win the East, they're not beating the Western Conference champ, most likely OKC. But I don't know if they're looking at it, we're gonna win the championship next season. I
Mm-mm.
think they just look at it from the perspective of they wanted a specific guy. They decided to, give away some picks in order to get him. A couple of those picks, if the Magic are good, it won't really matter. The 16th pick of the draft, I think they traded. How much does that guy play next year? I don't know. We'll see with the pick swap. Could be Phoenix, could be Washington, right? I don't know how good those teams will be in 2026, I think it is. So, I mean, I wouldn't really worry about it if I'm more. I think that they'll be better. But the thing for them is, regardless of the trades, they got to be healthy. Because I mean, we've talked about injuries with these other teams. I mean, last year Orlando had horrific luck in terms of injury, right? Where you had Paolo and Franz miss a bunch of time with the same injury. Then by the time they come back, right, or while they were out, then Suggs was out, and he basically never came back. So your three best players all missed significant time, and I don't know if that's going to necessarily change because as we've seen these last several postseasons, like even a team like Boston, right? Tatum was one of the most durable players in the league. Boom, he tears his Achilles, so now he's out for next season, right? So I mean, there's not really a whole lot you can do about that. I mean, Halliburton, right? I mean, is he a guy that? I mean, I guess he's missed some time, right? But either way,
he does miss time. I would say for sure.
Right. Okay. Well, that's fair. But
I mean, not like tons of time though. But
not this type of injury.
He does get banged up.
Right, but not like torn ligaments and things like that. Right now,
more so strains and stuff because of the movement.
Exactly. But. Right. So then let's see. Shea was the best player of these playoffs outright. J-Dub was second. So J-Dub was the second best player in the postseason, or the second best player, in the series. I'm assuming he's talking about this postseason.
I would agree with that. J-Dub was insane. That 40. That 40 piece puts him in that category 100%. Second option, in theory, shouldn't really be giving you 40. And if he is, then that kind of proves his worth, I think, for sure. So I would agree.
That's the thing where everybody had questions about him. And he was one of the reasons why I think people weren't necessarily sold on Oklahoma City, because you're wondering, all right, last postseason against Dallas, he wasn't that great, had some rough games. But that was also his first postseason, right? And we've seen guys who are not necessarily superstars have rough first postseason series, right? Even guys who are superstars have had bad series at times, right? All of them, basically. But that was last season, right? Then the question was this season, is J-Dub ready, to be the second option on a championship team? And the answer was absolutely yes, because in this game 7, right, he didn't have a crazy offensive game, but he did a bunch of other stuff. He was playing defense. Eventually, he caught fire in the second half, right? Obviously at that point, the lead started to feel kind of safe, but still, the game was kind of teetering, and he did help put it away. And even then, like you mentioned, the 40-point game in Game 5 to give them the 3-2 series lead, which felt like the series to me there, even though in fairness, I guess it wasn't, given how Game 6 and Game 7 could have potentially gone. And then even before that, right, he had a couple of games where he had like 26, 27 points, right? A couple of games where he was right there with SGA, right? Because there was real momentum that some people felt like, J-Dub could win Finals MVP. It wasn't going to be him. It was always going to be SGA. But the fact that you even have that conversation lets you know, yeah, he clearly was a great second option. Shea just shouted out Reese in his post-game saying he's heartbroken. Class act. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I know that there are a lot of people who don't like certain aspects of his game. I know there are some people who, I guess, don't like certain aspects of, some of his, post-game comments or whatever, right? But overall, you can see he's a really good dude, and I think, a guy that you would want to lead your franchise, right? He seems like a very low maintenance player. You're not really worried about him. He seems like pretty even keel, where even when they lose or get their butts kicked, you don't really see him overreact or underreact, right? It's just enough where you can tell clearly he cares about all of this. So I think he's clearly one of the best franchise players in the league, right? Because again, he's very reliable, super consistent, right?
Mr.
Even his
Consistent.
bad game, yeah, Mr. Consistent, right? Yeah, I mean, that's his superpower, right? Where very rarely is he going to have a game that's, where he's just completely awful. Like even some of his games where he's bad, right? It's still, like I said, the floor is still higher than some other guys. Because we've seen some other guys, like I mentioned with Halliburton, right? His floor is very high in terms of his best games, but his ceiling is very high in terms of games, but the floor sometimes is a little bit too low. So he asked a question here that's been a question for a very long time, right? This has been one of the questions over the course of the season, because I do remember earlier in the season, we had the discussion about the ratings. We had a discussion about, teams playing the same. But then this question right here, does this make, so is Shea the face of the NBA? I don't think so.
He can't be.
I think, well, it's not, and it's not like that you don't want him to be. I think the reality is that for now, I mean, look at the ratings of these finals. I mean, I hate talking about it because to me it doesn't really matter a ton. But, in a lot of these games, it was lower than some of the previous series. Now, you can say some of that's because of streaming, some of that's just because, just like I said, the way that people access a lot of these games has changed. But I just think in terms of, these new guys, for whatever reason, there's just something that I think a lot of more casual fans, it's just not as appealing for them, right? Maybe it could be the style of play. It could be the personalities, because even for a guy like SGA, his personality is kind of a quiet personality. I know sometimes he says, kind of, funny or insightful quotes or whatever, but, his personality isn't quite as big as some of the other previous superstars. So who is it then? Don't say Tatum or Ant.
It's neither of those guys.
What do you think?
I think it's vacant. That's what
vacant?
Yeah, that's what I would say. I think it's vacant and waiting to be claimed. Because I mean, like low key, I feel like people are still holding on to Bron and Steph. If you want me to be real, but
right, and I think those guys, yeah, you're right, and that's the big thing is that for those guys, I think as long as they're still playing, they'll probably they will be the main guys that I think most people will still kind of look at. It's just obviously at a certain point, they won't be playing and you'll have to find somebody else. But we talked about it when this was a big discussion earlier in the season where a lot of it you can't really force, right? Because the NBA at different times has tried to find guys, right, that they're trying to kind of have as the face. Like when Zion was drafted, right, it was very clear that there was a pretty concerted effort to try to get him to be the next guy, right? Because as a rookie, they tried to make sure that a bunch of his games were on national television, right? He was constantly discussed amongst, a lot of the other stars, but it just hasn't worked out, right? He hasn't been able to stay healthy, amongst other things, right? So it hasn't really worked for him. I know there's a lot of analysts, right, who I think it seems like they kind of want Ant to be like the face of the league, right? And I think part of that, right, it's the style of play. His personality also is very different from SGA's, right? It's a lot more loud. It's a lot more, I guess, some people might say entertaining, but oh my gosh, Zion's the face of Chick-fil-A. Jeez. But hey, he did slim down earlier this season. But
I feel like the face is narrative driven though. Like,
right.
I mean, look at all the previous ones, right? Like the I'm talking like the real ones, like Bron. Like the hype started in high school, right? Like we haven't had that in a very long time, right? And that's what you're probably hinting at with Zion. Like it was crazy. The high school hype, the college hype, the NBA hype hasn't really panned out, right? Like then you have Kobe, not really a lot of high school hype, but once he got to the league, different story. Jordan, there was, obviously not high school coverage, but college big time. You know what I mean? Luka and Zion are opening a 2 guys. Jeez, man. But,
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one before, but I mean, you can't force it. It'll happen eventually. Somebody will come along. There'll be a new prospect that everybody's, kind of, fiending for it. It'll happen. But I mean, like, there's a lot of good candidates. Don't get me wrong, but some of them haven't even played and haven't really shown us a whole lot.
Yeah, and SGA can be I just don't know. I just don't think he will be the face.
He's not going to be. And it's branding as well. He signed to Converse. Don't get me wrong, like Converse is cool, but it's not Nike. They're not going to sell, it's not like Jordan, right? Like it's just not going to happen, respectfully. So and don't get me wrong, like SGA, I love SGA. Like we probably are one of the very few podcasts that do not hate on him like at all whatsoever. We don't spew any negativity towards him.
Yeah. Even as the success has gone up, I mean, I think our praises has continued to stay pretty consistent.
So like, it's not like we're trying to put him down, but I think you do have to be realistic, right? Like the casual fan, and it all goes back to that. Meanwhile, Wemby's reading ancient texts and playing chess. He's doing Simon. Hey, I mean, good for him. I think he could be the face, but we got to see more on the court first, number one. Because we already know that he's got the off the court stuff, personality. Frenchman. You know, he's got
Yeah.
it all.
Right, and the reading ancient texts and playing chess. I mean, he also was doing karate and other stuff like that. So I mean, like, they're teaching a lot of discipline there. So there's actual value in terms of him doing the Shaolin monk stuff.
Yeah.
You know, because there are other guys, right, that have had some tumultuous off seasons the last couple of summers, because we had to talk about it, right? We had to talk about Ja. I think
Oh yeah, he was supposed to be the
first
face
year
too. Remember that?
yeah, yeah, 'cause the first year we did this podcast back in the 22-23 season, right? That was the year that Ja had, you know, the stretch where he was gone for a little bit. He had the thing at the club, then he had the stuff going on in the off season, right? Where then he was suspended for the first 25 games
Yeah.
of next year. Right? And that was supposed to be one of those guys, right? So, you know, and even like and oh my god. But, and even Ant, right? Like, you know, same thing. But either way, like, again, I don't think it has to be like Kendrick Perkins level, right? Where he mentioned something along the lines of like, you got to be a family man with kids and all that. Like, I don't, it doesn't have to
not
be
at all.
because, I mean,
Not at
yeah,
all.
I mean, and again, like, if you go back, not every single face of the league was that, right? So you don't have to necessarily think of it from that perspective. But as a whole, it'll happen eventually. I just don't necessarily know if any of these guys will be able to match, say like some of the previous guys, because you're talking about like, you know, in the case of like Jordan, LeBron, Kobe, Steph, those are like all timers, and these guys aren't there yet. So they're gonna have to probably build up over time, kind of, yeah, like you said, and kind of continue to ingratiate themselves with the fan bases. But again, I don't know if some of those guys will be able to do that in general, just because, you know, it's a different league now, right?
Just
it's
wait on the new prospect. That's what I would tell people. There's going to be somebody that comes along out of high school and college.
Yeah, who knows? It could be Cooper Flagg.
It could be. It could be the way they talk about him. You never know.
Yeah, you never know. And like you said, it is mostly narrative driven because it's not really something that I ever really thinking about, honestly, until like the last few years, right? And I mean, even then, it wasn't really a discussion a couple years ago. I think it's just it got to that point because, like I said, now that we're kind of near the end of, you know, the legendary generational guys, now people are kind of thinking of the next step forward. Because, like I said, even with these finals, right, ratings were lower than a lot of the other ones. Again, I don't care as much about that, right? But I'm sure that there are people who do care about it just because that's their job to care about it, right? Because there are people whose job it is to market the league and market these stars and get people to care and get people to be interested. And it's a shame because these finals were, up until the Halliburton injury, you could argue this has been the best finals in quite some time, right?
Most competitive.
SJ at the top of the league, Triple Crown. What do you think about that before we get into the
like best player in the league right now?
I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Undisputed, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, like, it's all about winning for me. Like, yeah, you could say the best statistic player would be a guy like Nikola Jokic. Sure, you could say that. But I think in terms of, you know, impact and winning, right, it's clearly SGA, right? You won the MVP, you won the title, and you won the finals MVP on top of, you know, your scoring, defense as well. You love to see that, being a two-way guy. Yes, sir.
Keith Wells is back. He's entered the chat. So
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Keith.
Shout out, Keith.
Untamed says, "What's up, Keith?" as well. Yeah. So, and that's kind of that's the funny thing about the discussion, you know, of this best player thing, because I don't know, for some people it changed. Because say like last year, right, the Celtics win the title, but you never heard anybody mention Jason Tatum now has become the best player in the game. Even if you go back in the past, right? Let's say, because again, we've had 7 different champions, but the best player in the league title, I don't feel like has changed 7 different times, right? Like, because if you go back, right, the Raptors, yeah, there were some people who said it was Kawhi, but I feel like at that time, most people still felt like some combo of like Giannis, LeBron, Durant, I guess, well, he got hurt at that point. And Kawhi was in there as well. Then the Lakers win the title, right? Then the Bucks win the title. So then it kind of flipped back to Giannis. Steph wins the title in 22, but I don't remember anybody saying, you know, he's back to being the best player in the league. And Jokic wins it, right? Then, because he had started to kind of have some people give him the best player in the league crown, but I think a lot of people wanted to wait to see him win the title before you give him that honor,
Yeah.
right? And then he got it. Now SGA has it. So worst case scenario, he's in the conversation, right? Now he's undisputably one of the 3 best players in the league. And, now you just kind of see where to go from here. And again, we've talked about that floor, right? Because again, look at some of his worst games this season, right? They're not that bad in comparison to some of the other, guys that are in the lower tier, right?
Yeah.
They're, again, like when you get to that level, that's how you know you're awesome, right? That's how you know he's in the discussion, because in a couple of these finals games, you're like, did he really play that well? And then you look up and then it says that he has 35, right? That's how you know you're in that sphere.
And he's playing defense.
Right. So he's in there, right?
Yeah.
Untamed, SGA deserved, Depoy too. I don't think he was going to win that. I mean, it was
a case for it though.
Yeah, but I don't think he was going to win it, because I feel like most people
to do it.
Yeah, and I think most people feel like other guys on his team are better defensively, right? Like I think most people feel like Lou Dort, J-Dub, I guess even Chet Holmgren, right? I think most people feel like those guys, would be in a better discussion for Defensive Player of the Year. Very hard for a non-USA born player to face the NBA. I mean, yeah, he's from Canada.
Very good point.
So that is a good point as well. Yeah. But I just think like personality, game-wise, I don't think he's going to be the face of the league. But either way, he's clearly one of the best players in the league, and you also have to want it. I think there's an argument, not necessarily for him, but like even Ant at different points has kind of like almost been like, I don't really want to be the face of the league, right? But people still try to make him the face of the league. You at least got to want it, but just because you want it doesn't mean you're gonna get it, right?
Because somebody will embrace it.
Yeah, because like Tatum was like, I think I'm one of the faces of the league. It's like, no, people don't feel that. So.
No, you're not. Respectfully, you're one of the best players in the league. Right. You're not the face.
Yeah, exactly. No. So I think like what you said, LeBron and Steph will have the title, but that's a lot of that is the legacy factor, right? Yeah. But at a certain point, it'll be vacant and it'll be up for grabs. But I can't say for sure I know who's going to get it, right? Because again, if rank all, take the top 10 players in the league, how many of those guys, are in that discussion for face of the league, right? Because even a guy like a Jokic, like he'll never be in the discussion, I think, for face of the league, because I just don't think people feel that way about
him. Even though care.
They really,
he doesn't care.
Right, exactly.
He doesn't want that.
Right. No. And again, it's a big responsibility. So, that's the other factor where, there are a lot of other things you have to do as well. And, that's why you give credit to those guys anyways for doing that, because not everyone wants to do it. Yeah. Clippers banging their head on the wall right now. Yeah, I guess we should talk about that factor, right? Where, the Clippers, again, we can argue about whether or not it was the right move. I think at the time it was fine because Kawhi's coming off the title. He's considered one of the 5 best players in the league. The thought process is if you don't get Paul George, you're not getting Kawhi, and he goes to the Lakers or he stays in Toronto or something else, right? It just ended up not working out, right? Because then SGA ends up getting better and better each year. Still got better this year. Now he's better than, not legacy-wise all time, but, right now in the league, better than those guys. Obviously, they also got the pick that became Jalen Williams. I think there's still some other stuff left in that deal, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. And then obviously, from there on out, they've put together this championship team. But, again, if you're the Clippers, it's tough because, there was when the Clippers first put that squad together, a lot of people had them as the favorites to win it all, but they just never were quite able to put it together. Some of that was injuries, and then some of that was just some rough postseason losses. Shout out to Kawhi. He had an all-time game this postseason against Denver. Good to see him do well. Yeah, that's the thing, because, when we watched him in that series, you kind of forgot about him because it was like, wow, there was a stretch where, people talk about him as one of the best postseason guys and one of the best players in the league. It's just tough because for him, he just can't seem to consistently play enough games to get you, through the regular season. They did win 50 games, but, as we've seen, you got to be healthy for most of the season to be able to get it done, as the main guy. Because even with Oklahoma City, even during the stretches where Chet Holmgren was out or Isaiah Hartenstein was out, right? Because they had a long stretch where one or the other of their bigs was out. They had a stretch where both of those guys were out. And, there was SGA, right? Who was there and consistently being able to, you know, as we said, Mr. Consistency, right? Be able to kind of hold everybody together and, be the glue essentially for that team. The 3-star team era is on hold for now. Do we look at OKC as a big three?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say they're a baby big three, but they're still a big three, right? I think there's tons of room to, grow for all of these guys, right? Who knows? Shea could get better. I think, he's probably closer to, finished product, but Chet has a lot of room to grow, and the defensive, floor for him is amazing, right? You saw that throughout the, the whole series. Exactly. So if Chet's offense can, soar, along with J-Dub too, right? Like both of those guys, if they can get better offensively and more consistent, especially in the postseason, yeah, for sure, big three. But it's really crazy to think that they were able to pull that off, right?
Yeah, but I know what he's talking about. He's talking more so about like the 3 superstar kind of team build, right? Where you're talking about like, like say when you look at the Heat big 3.
Okay,
or I
yeah,
guess
sure.
The Warriors with they had 4, right? But I think that's more so what he's talking about.
Okay.
And that's the part that is probably going to be difficult because of the fact that with the new CBA, once you start paying guys a boatload of money, it's going to be hard to keep those players together, and they also have to be healthy because that's the other factor, right? Where with Oklahoma City, they do have other guys outside of those 3 players. Now, they need to be healthy for the playoffs, right? But they were able to sustain some of those guys being hurt during the regular season because you can put somebody back in and then they can kind of step up and play their role over the course of the regular season, right? But, when we looked at the Brooklyn Nets, right, their big 3, injuries kind of did them in, as well as the other weird stuff that happened post-COVID. You can look at some of the Phoenix big 3, right? Ended up not really being as good as we thought anyways, right? But injuries also didn't help, right? So that's the part that is going to be difficult. But for Oklahoma City, I don't think people are going to look at that as a 3-star build, right? Because SJ is the superstar, and then the other guys are like, tiers below, right? Like J-Dub, probably, I don't, like, will he be an all-star next season?
I think he could be.
He was, like he can, but like he's in that tier. We just saw him have a 40-point finals game. Right,
Chet is the one who's holding them back from being a superstar big 3.
What? Where is that comment?
I'm saying that. I think that's the case, right? Like,
but it's not even like he's not even bad.
No,
like, that's
no.
You're not even saying he's bad.
No.
It's just like, he's not like in the all-star tier just yet.
No.
Right, and I think regular season, and you saw the difference between the regular season and the playoffs because he didn't have as many of these offensive struggles in the regular season. Right? Now, they don't run a lot of plays for him necessarily, and there are certain elements of his game that you can, like, there's a foundation for. He can put the ball on the floor. He is capable of hitting jumpers. He hit some jumpers in this game, right? Because there was a long stretch in the last few games where that guy, could not hit a jumper. He couldn't hit a jumper last year in the playoffs. But like you said, the defensive floor is so high, and that's the thing with a 3-star build is you have to have guys that can defend. And the problem with, say, like, he mentioned Phoenix, that was laughable. The problem with that one is you really didn't have any all-NBA level defenders in that group, right? Like Durant is probably the best defender of the 3. Booker's a decent defender, but not necessarily like a lockdown defender. And then Beal, not necessarily in that tier either, right? I mean, we saw end of regular season Beal last year where he was kind of finding his way in that role. Then the playoffs completely undid it.
Oh my God, yeah, Ant destroyed that team.
Yeah, and now he's probably the most hated man in Phoenix right now.
Yeah,
so
literally.
Either way, OKC, they're on their way in terms of like the 3-star build.
He said now their entire starting 5 is all shooting guards.
Yeah, so and like I said, we'll get to that, momentarily. I do kind of want to stick on, some of the finals talk. But I guess the other question we kind of have to figure out is, all right, so now that we saw Oklahoma City win the title, right, how does this affect and how does this kind of determine some of these other teams around the league, their approach in terms of being able to put together a championship roster? Obviously, OKC, their build, not everybody has those type of guys in terms of the personnel. So maybe you might look at the Pacers in terms of maybe that could be a more realistic build, but you don't have a Halliburton necessarily. Not every team has that. But let's see. If I'm Booker, I'm asking out and demanding a choice. Take a starter picks, bro. I want to play with Cade and Jalen Duren. That's funny. I forgot he is from Michigan.
Yeah, he's from
isn't he?
Detroit.
Yeah,
He's from Detroit.
yeah. Wow. Oh man.
Yeah, man. It's crazy.
But
right?
yeah, I forgot about that. That is true.
Yeah.
Son's little
Yeah.
little three. Now then, oh,
Yeah, that's
jeez.
done,
But
man.
yeah,
But
and
nah, I think like to go back to your question though.
right.
I think teams are probably gonna. I think this is the number one thing that they're gonna be looking for, right? They're gonna be looking for depth at the center position, right? I think teams
Oh,
are gonna be vying for a double big lineup, right? And you saw a lot of the teams, that did have success in the postseason, especially in the Western Conference. They did have a double big lineup that worked at certain points, but also gives you that versatility. How many guys are on that in the market? I don't know how many guys are going to be like super versatile defenders. Exactly. So it's going to be. I think you're going to see a lot of movement in terms of the bigs this season. I think you're going to see a lot of people covet some of the guys incoming via the draft. So introducing your Phoenix Suns at the 2 guard, the whole team. Yeah, pretty much. But I think if you want a realistic chance of contending, I think, the Thunder have proved that you need to invest in your front court for sure.
And it's funny because the double big lineup, as the finals went on, we didn't see it as much, right? Because they started to spend more time separating both of those guys. Then the Thunder would also have stretches where they would play no center, right? Because even in this game, we saw a stretch where it was Jalen Williams at the 5, right? Like they did in the regular season. And there were stretches where it looked kind of rough, but then there were other stretches where they were able to use their speed in order to force turnovers. Agreed, the big man is back. So, but that's the thing, even when they weren't running double big, you have the option of having a big on the floor almost at all times. And like you said, the versatility.
Yeah.
Tony Bradley was trash.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, that was the Indiana. Yeah, that's the Pacers one. Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. Like I think teams will probably be looking to attempt to do something with that, right?
Yeah, and the thing is for Indiana, in fairness, they did have a couple of their backup centers previously tore their Achilles.
Sure.
Because James Wiseman and Isaiah Jackson were not that theirs are like amazing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but
not that although Jackson gave him some decent minutes in the playoffs.
I would agree. I would agree with that, but Wiseman, no.
Right, but so they kind of had to at the last minute kind of figure out something because they traded for Thomas Bryant from the Heat, but he's not an ideal backup center either. Not that great defensively, and Bradley was out of the league, right? Yeah. Because I remember him years ago, right, where he was on like Chicago and some other team, but he was out of the league for a while. Steve-O and Alpi was awesome. Yeah, that double big lineup for Houston. And that's the nice thing about Houston re-signing and retaining Steven Adams with that 3-year deal is that in the regular season didn't play quite as much because, he had some injury issues for the last couple of seasons. Mm-hmm. But in the playoffs, he was huge because literally, right? Yeah. No pun intended. But like they were able to run that double big lineup and it did give Golden State some real problems. And during the regular season when they gave a lot of teams problems, even though that's not like what you would normally expect as a double big in today's NBA because neither guy is really a spacing 5, right? But at least with Şengün, he can put the ball on the floor. He's, I guess, willing to play on the outside, even though he doesn't take a lot of, jumpers. But still, that was a huge part of their identity this year. So we're probably going to see that. But again, realistically, how many teams can afford to have like a super deep team where you have like a legit 10+ guys that can realistically play? That may be tough because some of those other teams are deep, but we know as the playoffs go along, the depth doesn't really show up as much. Like even in this game for Oklahoma, I mean, they basically played 7 guys. I mean, you had a couple guys also play, right? Mm-hmm. Like Kenrich Williams played 4 minutes. Wiggins played like 10 minutes, but they didn't really do much of anything. It really came down to the starters. And even Hartenstein, played only 18 minutes. And then you look at that, 32 minutes from Caruso, 26 from Cason Wallace. And if he had played like how he played in the previous games, he may not have played 26 minutes at all. And then they would have been down to like 6 guys.
Right.
But the fact that they had so many guys in the first place It's better to have that, and then the depth starts to run out versus like we're not a deep team at all, and then you definitely can't, rely on those guys by that point. And the Pacers are deep. Kenrich Williams is goated. Braun hit the shot on his head. Yeah, you're talking about the shot to get the all-time scoring record. Yeah, and Thomas Bryant was in there too because he was the
and he was
guy
calling for the ball.
he was the guy that was calling for the ball from LeBron. But he does have it. He did win a title there. So I guess he's got the ring.
True.
There's been discussions about ring culture recently.
Right.
So Lakers' new ownership will get a solid. I mean, I guess I'm sure that's what Mark Walter is thinking. I'm sure he's like, all right, let's go out and get a pick.
The Wizard streak is over too.
Oh yeah, because
no more former Wizards winning the ring.
Yeah, you're right. That goes back all the way to what was it?
It was 8 years, I think. It was an 8-year streak. 8 years, wow, right? Yeah.
There was like JaVale McGee. I'm not gonna think about everybody, but I know it was like JaVale McGee, Thomas Bryant, Nick Young. I know those guys. KCP.
Yeah, KCP was another one.
Yeah, a few other guys were on that list as well. Porzingis was
that was the one last year.
Right, exactly. So just kind of funny how that goes. I mean,
Thomas freaking Bryant.
I think it was Otto Porter Jr.
That was another one.
Who was the Bucks Wizards guy? Oh, Portis.
Yeah, Portis. Bobby Portis. Yeah,
Portis. JaVale McGee won that dunk contest against Blake. Oh man, yeah, that's a throwback. I mean, that's kind of funny because I remember when we talked about the dunk contest, right? A couple years ago, right? Where this was I think it was like going into before the first one with McClung, and there was so much discussion about how the dunk contest was getting kind of rough. And it's been, it's been better in the last few years, but I would like to see some other stars do it, but I don't know if they're gonna do it. I just don't think they're. I think we're past that point now.
Yeah.
But going back to that team construction factor, I guess you need size, you need versatility, but I guess the other question is like you need also clearly an established identity, right? Because the Pacers' identity is very different from these other teams, but it is their own identity. And, you kind of have to lean into it, right? Because, when you look at Boston last year, right, they had that identity of literally everybody on our rotation can play both ends of the floor at a high level and also and make a high volume of, right? That was the way that they played. Because a lot of times people will kind of have rosters where guys are a little bit more complementary, right? Where you have guys with kind of opposing skill sets. But, these last few seasons, right, we've seen teams where there's I don't want to use the word redundant, but just like, where you have a lot of guys with a lot of similar skill sets and you stack it on top of one another. And then that's how you get your team's identity. Like for Oklahoma City, it's a bunch of guys that, even though outside of Chet and Hartenstein, they're not very tall, they are physical, they have long arms, and they're willing to get into rock fights, right? And that's kind of a big part of the identity. They have a bunch of guys who can kind of put the ball on the floor and make plays. They didn't necessarily showcase it quite as much in this series or in the postseason quite as much. But, even guys like Alex Caruso, right? He fits into that, right? As a physical defender who's willing to get into a lot of rock fights. And then a smart player as well, right? Like, because he and some of these other guys, how many times did we see in this series Alex Caruso get a backdoor cut? Jalen Williams get a backdoor cut? So for the team construction, that's probably what we're looking at going forward. McClung is a professional dunker, not an NBA player. I don't have too many disagreements with that. We haven't really seen him in an NBA game in a while.
Yeah.
But, usually for a lot of those guys, a lot of times, there's a reason why they're not able to get consistent NBA minutes. You have to get the opportunity first. And for some guys, they never get the opportunity, right? He had a couple, but wasn't really quite able to shake that. I like the apron. It's going to balance the league out. If AC got that put back down, it would have been play of the year. Remember, it's going to be lost. It's going to be lost to time now, but that Nesmith put back dunk, I think it was from game 5. It was the game, because Indiana lost. Mm-hmm. That's one of those plays that's going to be lost because even the commentators, when it happened, they didn't even realize that he dunked it. Forrest Burke had to remind Mike Breen, he dunked that ball. You have to show some emotion because he scored. Yeah. And he was like, oh my goodness. He was like, oh wow, he actually did dunk it. And so that was kind of a crazy play in the finals. I mean, like I said, and Tyreek's choke sign lost. Yeah, that's the thing is like, I mean, people I think are going to remember that, at least from his perspective, but it's tough. I will think this Pacers team, we're not going to forget it.
Mm-mm.
But let's say we go 20 years from now, I don't know what that's going to be like. But, the thing is, considering people bring back everything now, right? You got social media and you have the internet and all that. It may be a little bit harder to forget some of that. But the Pacers had so many memorable moments over the course of this postseason. And I would stay for them, yeah, like losing game 4 the way they did at home when it looked like they were going to win that game. That hurts because I think they were up 10 at one point in the late third. They
Yeah.
had that 4-point lead with a couple minutes to go and just could not close it out. They could have been NBA champions had they won that game. But games like that are also why you give Oklahoma City a time, because of the fact that they had, even though they were a dominant regular season team, they were in the playoffs. A lot of that was at home. They had some real rock fights in these road playoff games, and they didn't win all of them, but they won just enough, including a lot of the big ones,
Yeah.
to be able to win it all. And that's what being a championship team is all about. Because because you do have to win some tough crunch time games at certain points. I can't think of any teams in recent memory that didn't have to win at least one or two close games. Even the KD Warriors, right? They had a couple of back and forth games, right? Pacers overachieved. That's what Keith Wells said.
Kind
What do you
of,
think?
kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I'd
Because
say so because I think you look at what I think they did, because you look at what people expected going into the season, not a title, and they were one win away, so they were as good as pretty much anybody over the course of the season. But I guess if you're a Pacers fan, I think part of what's so awful is the Halliburton injury, because you came so close, and not only were you not able to get it, now you lost your best player.
but
For the next season
because
after I
the only thing
yeah.
I would say was like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like post what All-Star break, that team was just insane, and they were just kind of under everybody's nose. That's why I think you could say they overachieved, but in reality, that's kind of who they were the whole time. They just figured it out late. Yeah,
They were just good.
yeah, very late bloomer. That's what I would say. But I do
Yeah,
somewhat agree with you guys.
he said after JT went down, we all thought Knicks.
Yeah, including myself.
Yeah, because by that point, yeah, the Cavs were gone by that point because JT they went down in the second round and the Pacers ended their series first.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we definitely thought that for sure.
Yeah, I thought the
So
Knicks had
yeah,
Indy 100%, but
right.
whatever.
Yeah. So I can see both sides for that one. But going into the season, right? They weren't projected as a championship team, right?
Mm-mm.
And that, like I said, that's the tough part, is to get that close and to now be further away next year, right? And nothing is guaranteed. But it's just tough. But Oklahoma City, do you have like a most memorable moment for them over the course of this postseason run?
Probably when I can't remember what game it was, but it was when Shea took over in the clutch. That kind of told me, okay, like
You mean this series or in the
yeah,
four?
in the finals. Yeah, it was where I think he
That was
scored what,
4.
like 10 straight or whatever. Was it 10 straight?
That was game 4.
Yeah,
That was
game 4. Yeah, I would say game 4, 10 straight. Just freaking took over, flow state, that kind of thing. That was pretty memorable. I think, the game where they blew out the Grizzlies in historical fashion, that was pretty cool as well. I think that kind of showed you the real dominance that we were kind of looking at as well.
J-Dub said he had his first drink, cap, LOL.
Yeah, I mean, we already know what's up with that.
He's like 24, right? He's not it's not like he's 21 or 22, right? He's kind of
I think he is older. I think he did
he's
2 years.
24.
He did 2 years in college, so yeah, he
Yeah,
is a little bit
NBA.com
older.
has him at 24. So,
Yeah.
but I guess then some people would be like, "Oh, well, you haven't had your first drink until you're 24." So,
That is what it is, but yeah, I think those would be my memories, my favorite ones.
yeah, the Minnesota game 4 where they went up 3-1, right? Where all three of those guys, Chet, SGA, J-Dub, I think that would be up there because it was such an awesome game. Minnesota gave them everything they had to that they could ask for. Actually, no, it was 2-1, not 3-1. It was to go up 3-1.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If Minnesota wins, the series is tied.
Mm-hmm.
If City wins, they go up 3-1.
Mm-hmm.
And all three guys had huge games at different points. And I thought that was one of the most fun games for them of the season. I think it was game 5 against Denver, right? Where they had, where they had to come from behind game in the fourth quarter, and Jokic is trying to answer. He scores like every bucket down the stretch, but OKC ends up hitting big shots. SGA gets a couple of buckets. J-Dub gets a couple of buckets. So that was an awesome one too. And like I said, those are the type of games that you have to win in order to be a championship team, and that's what they were able to do. Um, and again, that's why people were so high on them, right? Because the highs are super high. The highs are among some of the best that we've seen in recent memory. But I guess then another question I would like to ask is, we talked about this series, right? We're going in. So I had OKC in 6. You had OKC in 5. I think the general consensus was Oklahoma City is going to walk over Indiana. This is probably going to be a relatively uneventful series. Where does this finals rank for you in recent memory? So many stars missing next season due to injuries. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, the fact that it went 7, I think, is pretty memorable, right? Like, when's the last time we had basketball this late?
Let's just stick with this decade. So let's say 2020 to now. So the last 5 years.
I mean, the bubble, I think, was a little bit more memorable.
Really?
Yeah, just because of the time and the circumstance.
Yes, if we'd be good next season.
Wow, that's funny. That's actually pretty funny. Yeah, who would run the point? I'd be curious. But yeah, I would say the Lakers one, 2020 is more memorable.
Okay.
I think the Giannis one is more memorable.
Okay.
And then I would probably go with this one.
That's interesting because I feel like because I actually didn't have the Lakers Heat one up there quite as much. For me as a Laker fan, it would definitely be, my favorite one personally. I guess the only thought process that I had was just going into the series, it felt like the Lakers were pretty decent favorites. And obviously it ended up going 6. I think the Lakers ended up going 3-1. I know there were some Heat in that series. Obviously, you had the Jimmy Butler games, right? Everybody remembers that's where the meme came from of him, bent over on the bench because he was so gassed.
Yeah.
But I actually had this one up there, right? Bucks Suns was the other one, just because Bucks were down 0-2. Giannis obviously has a great closeout game, 50 points. You had the other big game 5, right, with Holiday getting the strip and then Giannis getting the bucket to put the game away. But the last 2 I would say would probably be on the lower end, right? Because last year I think a lot of people thought that finals would be really good. We both had the Celtics winning. I know a lot of analysts had them, but we had them winning in 6. It ended up being 5. It wasn't even close other than game 3. And then the one before that, Heat Nuggets, that was another one where that one was going in, you assumed the Nuggets were going to win. Like, it would have been a shocker if the Heat had won. That was kind of what people thought this finals would be. I think there were a few close games in there, but you never really felt like the Heat were going to win that series. This one was literally a coin flip going into this game. So this one is up there. I know SGA and Halliburton aren't necessarily like the all-timer personalities, and that might be why some people may not have. But I'm glad this series ended up being way more entertaining than expected. The Halliburton injury does knock it down a notch, which is probably, I'm sure that's probably a big reason for you.
Yeah,
right?
big time.
That takes the stinger out of the game 7.
Yeah.
Right? Because we probably would have had a back and forth because we know Game 7s in the finals are usually close and competitive. This one was in the first half, not so much in the second half.
Yeah, literally.
Right. So, I guess, are there any other angles we should talk about? I guess for Oklahoma City next year, right? I guess the question is, are they the early odds-on favorites? That tear was so brutal on slow-mo replay. Yeah, and it didn't help that they kept on showing us. Because, it was already, when I first saw it, I knew it was bad. But then having to watch it over and over again, and you see his reaction Obviously, they cut to his father, and they show him going into the tunnel. It was just awful to see, and I just hated the fact that they kept replaying it and forcing us to have to watch it. Just I don't know. The ESPN broadcast or ABC broadcast I thought was a little disappointing this year. And they knew it, right? Because there were a couple of times where they shook it up because of what people were saying, right? Because what did they do? Game 2, people complained about the court or the floor, and then they photoshopped the NBA Finals logo or trophies in there.
Yeah, they just
Then
did a
what was
hollow
it?
projection.
Yeah, then what was it? Game 4 or whatever it was, game 4, 5. Then they end up having the starting 5 introduction back in there, right? Which they always used to have. And that was another complaint that people had. So, that's some stuff that they need to kind of fix up and patch up and improve on, because they're going to have it for a while. And with this new media deal, hopefully they will be better.
Yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, so I guess would Oklahoma City be the odds on favorite for next year? Like, would they be, and again, we'll do our preseason picks in the summer as we get closer to the regular season, to the preseason, but would they be the odds on favorite to win it all next year?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look at the way that they handled themselves this postseason. Teams gave them a challenge, but they always came out on top, right? And the room for growth, I think, is what's going to scare a lot of people. And I think, that's probably going to be the main carrying force as to why they would be the favorites, right? You already have Shea, and you know that J-Dub, Chet can get better. You have new guys, like Topich or whatever. Like,
your guy.
You never know, like, what those guys could be. Draft picks down the line too, so who knows? We'll see what happens. They could make a swing in the offseason or something like that to trade and get an even crazier upgrade that we don't know about.
Exactly. So, yeah, I would say they would be there. Because, again, the thing is, the tough part is they, like Untamed said, they don't have to change anything. Other teams are going to have to catch up with older teams. Let's see. Everyone else is playing catch up with older teams. It should be clear cut right now. I think they're going to definitely be the favorites for sure. For sure. Again, they have to stay healthy, and that's been the derailing factor for all of these teams going back to back, right? Where injuries end up, and some of it is like the teams end up not being as good the following season. That happened with some of these teams, but then obviously for some of them in the playoffs, injuries absolutely killed them. So that's the other factor as well, and it's very difficult now to go back to back. And I guess, another question is, does that kind of elevate some of these guys more? Because it feels like in this era, it's become increasingly harder to just dominate and just go out and win 3 straight, not that even happens a ton anyways, right? But we're not seeing any recent back-to-backs. We're not even seeing necessarily teams get back to the NBA Finals, right? Like, you think about it from the perspective of each year, not only does the reigning champion not win it all, they don't even make the finals. They don't even get past the second round.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so I get, and that would be the question, right? Where for some of these guys don't look like a bunch that'll be complacent. They are real hoopers, and it shows. If they repeat, it won't surprise me. It wouldn't shock me at all if they repeat. They just have to stay healthy, and that's been the big question for literally everybody, right? Even if you're an awesome team, a great team, injuries can happen right at the end. I mean, look at Denver, right? They took Oklahoma 7. Then at the end of Game 6, Gordon hurts his hamstring. Game 7 happens, and he's not the same guy, right?
Yeah.
Halliburton, they get all the way. They go the distance. They're at Game 7. One last game, he gets hurt and he can't make it, and that's the tough part of getting through an NBA season is you have to go through a long 82-game season. You have to be healthy. Then you have to go through a 6-week postseason. Got to be healthy there too. Correction, Jokic took OKC to 7. All right.
True.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird because he had a couple of games, right, where I think, what was it? It was Game 4 where he had kind of a mediocre game for a lot of it, where he was turning the ball over and not making a ton of shots. But, Murray had a big game. Gordon had like a go-ahead, a 3 to tie it. But again, you need a team. And that's the other thing that we're definitely learning, which we hadn't even mentioned yet. The days of like superstar, clear cut. Game 7, AC was bear hugging him though. Yeah, that's the thing that Oklahoma is able to do. But again, you don't get mad at Oklahoma City. You get mad at the way that the officiating is, where it can be inconsistent game to game. You don't get mad at OKC because that's how they play. And if that's how they're going to play, right, then it's on everyone else to kind of find ways to adjust,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of the tough part there. But I was gonna say for the superstars, right? Like the days of, okay, one superstar that's got like a mediocre team, around him, right? A bunch of role players. That's probably not going to happen anymore. And that's kind of one of the things that I think tripped up so many people in terms of these playoff predictions, even us, right? Where, we'll look at those series and we'll be like, all right, this team has like two of the three best players, right? Something like that. Or this other team has the best player. So that means they got to win the series. But that hasn't happened as much in recent years, right? Like Kobe and Smush Park. But that hasn't happened as much in recent years, right? We've actually seen, some of these other teams now where you're kind of like, wow, this doesn't make as much sense, right? Where like if this was 10 years ago, like you would not normally have seen this happen, right? Like say with the Heat and the Pacers, right? You looked at the Heat and the Pacers and it's like, all right, the Heat have two of the three best guys on the floor, right? Whereas Indiana, they have a good team. You have Paul George and some other guys, but they may not be quite good enough, right? But now, 10 years later or 10 plus years later, stuff like that can flip. And, is that because, and I think we've talked about it, where now there's so much more talent in the league, it's deeper now. And, there's not as much of a gap between a lot of these guys, right? Like I said, once you get past the top five, there's not as much of a difference. And if you can get a really good team around those guys, clearly you can go the distance, right? Let's talk about your Wizards for a bit. What does the future hold? All right, take it from here.
Oh God, we're really gonna do this tonight? Oh boy.
I mean, he asked it.
I mean, there's potential. There's always going to be potential, right? I mean, the young core, I love them. A bunch of hoopers like Bub Carrington seems to be the truth. His efficiency from the mid range is pretty good. Alex R, solid rim protector, right? I think they're kind of looking probably to acquire more veterans and see what they can do with those kinds of contracts, right? Like Chris Middleton, I think that was a good move in terms of getting him to come over here. Marcus Smart, that was another one as well. I think probably looking to move Jordan Poole would be a big thing for the Wizards this offseason. But I think the thing that really stung was, them not really getting a, solid, draft pick. I mean, like 6 is okay, but, you didn't get a blue chip guy out of this draft. Alex shooting 12% field goal. Yeah, I mean, like I said, offensively, he's super raw, but that, he has potential, right? And I think it'll help once we get, maybe a true table setter at the point guard position, maybe. But yeah, I mean, offensively, he's raw, but defensively, he's a freaking monster. Super underrated. You got Keyshawn George, good Swiss Army knife. So yeah, I would think, just kind of continue to get young guys and continue to, develop them. And, hopefully we can get on Oklahoma City's level or something like that. But, yeah, continue to get assets and draft capital and yeah, keep acquiring and rebuilding. I like Bilal mostly. That's funny because recently I haven't really been too high on him. I mean, like, I know he had a weird end of the season, with the injury and stuff like that, but I really wasn't liking the progression that I saw. Like, he started off the season really hot, like in the first month or two, really, really good numbers and, really good impact, but I don't know if he can be more than a Jaden McDaniels, right? I want him to be more than that, but if he's just going to be Jaden McDaniels, then I'm kind of checking out on him in terms of being our franchise guy because it seems like the team is being built around him right now. And I don't know how viable that's going to be, right? Like, we do need a blue chip prospect or we need to trade for somebody. We don't have the guy. Like, we're one of those teams that doesn't have a guy. We're kind of just have a bunch of good young players and no sense of, I guess, direction in terms of building around somebody, right?
Yeah, you probably need like another perimeter guy that can actually be, one of those go-to guys. Because right now, most of the perimeter guys are kind of in, like if we're talking about Bub Carrington, there's probably not a version of him that's like the starting guard for a really, really good team. You know what I mean? Like he might be like a good, like a good backup scorer, or maybe like the other guard on a team. But you probably need somebody there. Because I think if you have that, then it makes everyone's job easy, right? Because then you don't have to ask Alex Sarr to create as much on his own. You have like a guy that could run some pick and pops with him, right? And things like that. Then you might be able to have a guy who can get some Bilal some easy looks, right? Because you're not at the point right now where you have a guy who can make things. Like you said, they're all kind of doing their own thing,
Yeah, it's
right?
bad.
But as put together as a team, you don't have somebody that kind of puts it all together. And like you said, that's probably the blue chip guy. It's just the question is, are you going to be able to get that in this year's draft? I don't
No,
know.
no,
Yeah.
no. It's not happening this year. It's not happening next year. It's all lottery based. It's not going to happen.
Hey,
Got to trade
hey,
for it.
he says JB to the Wiz.
I'd be fine with that,
Jaylen
but
Brown.
it depends on what we give up. But yeah, you need to trade for somebody. You need to trade. I'm serious. You need to trade for a superstar talent. We don't have a superstar. You can't win anything without a superstar.
And you never know. Who knows? Because with the way that things are looking, right? People have now been talking about Arias Bailey,
my
right? Kind
God,
of dropping in the draft. So hey, he might be a guy that the Wizards end up picking up, and
He's not
all
going
of
to
a
fall to
sudden that
6, man. I don't believe
never
it.
know.
I don't believe it. That's top 3 talent. Top 3 talent the entire year, and now the week leading up to the draft, you're telling me he's going to fall to 6? It wouldn't surprise me if he falls to 4 or 5, but 6?
Hey,
No.
look at Cam Whitmore.
No. It's not
We
gonna,
both had Cam Whitmore mocked as top 10, and then he
I know,
just
but
drops.
it's not going to happen.
It's different.
It's completely different. The guy was top 3, even top 2 consensus at one point, right?
Right.
Like the upside is too high. Like I get it, the draft stock is falling due to the some of the stuff that's coming out with his agent, some of the intangibles, the measurements at the draft combine. I'm not buying it. I don't see him falling past 4. Like I could see, Philly trading back or something like that, and the team, that trades up. Yeah, like they would take him, but I don't think he goes past 4. There's no way. Like Charlotte would, I think, take him in a heartbeat. Even Utah would take him in a heartbeat. I think the only team that would probably be willing to pass on him is maybe Philly due to fit concerns and timeline, right?
And he canceled, his
Yeah,
meeting or whatever.
that too, the workout or whatever.
But you never know. Daryl Morey might just be like, "Well, I'll take him anyways."
It's possible for sure, but like I said, I don't think he falls past 3. No shot.
Yeah, and that's the wild thing is the draft is going to be this Wednesday, right? Round 1 will be this Wednesday. Then you'll have round 2 on Thursday because now the draft is split into 2 days, right?
Yeah.
With round 1 and 2 being on separate days. So I guess that helps prevent it being a 5-hour long event. We'll see how long it is, but regardless, that's going to be something to watch because there's kind of lots of talks about maybe some of these teams will make trades with one another. You kind of change where they are in the draft because some of these teams, like say the Nets, they have 4 first-round picks in this draft. So there's not really to me much of a reason to draft all 4 guys, right? I think ideally you'd like to maybe find a way to trade up or maybe trade some of those for future picks down the line. I don't know, but Boston's new owners are going to be doing some charity this off. Who knows who catches some charity? And that's a big thing, right? Because with the Celtics, they're going to be in that luxury tax threshold, right? Where, they're going to have to pay the repeater tax as well for a team that probably isn't winning the title next season. And that's where you kind of wonder, like, some of those guys teams will want. It's just a matter of what are they willing to take back? What teams are willing to get some of those guys, right? Because, or how far are they willing to go? Are they willing to trade a Jaylen Brown? Or is it going to be more so limited? Jrue Holiday or Kristaps Porzingis, or maybe some of the bench guys, Sam Hauser, or, I don't know, Peyton Pritchard or somebody. I trade the whole team for Giannis and Jokic, LOL. Yeah, I think a lot of teams would. It's just a matter of for Giannis right now. He may not go anywhere because, a lot of his trade talk has died down, right? We know Jokic isn't going anywhere, right? Because there isn't really a need right now, although they need to get a new. But I guess, should we talk about the Durant trade now?
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Yeah, because that's probably the last thing that we'll need to touch on anyways. But Kevin Durant, trade finally happened. We kind of felt like at a certain point he was going to get moved. It was only a matter of time. There was no point for Phoenix to have this continue to go out any longer. And he finally got moved to the Houston Rockets, right? So he goes to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, the number 10 pick in this draft, and then 5 second-round picks. The trade can't be done yet. It has to be completed July 6th, so there is a potential chance for this trade to expand, right? There's John Gambadoro, who covers the Suns, he believes that the Suns will keep Jalen Green. But even if it's not Jalen Green, like they could expand this deal to move some other guys because Phoenix in theory has other guys that they should be open to moving. Like you don't need to have guys like Grayson Allen or Royce O'Neal. You don't have to have those guys on the team now the way you may have felt like you needed them when you had the big three. But we'll look at it from both sides. I guess we can start with Houston. You do get back Kevin Durant, and the nice thing about this deal is you can look at it from the perspective. Jalen Green paints his nail this black. KD paints the court red. Big difference. Oh my gosh,
I like that.
that's
I like
amazing.
that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And that's kind of the gist of this anyways, right? Is that you're going from Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks, right, who are good players in their own right and bring value. But this is Kevin Durant. Is it the same Kevin Durant from a few years ago? Not necessarily, but he's still very good. And he is the type of player, at least offensively, where that's the kind of player that Houston needed. This was the team that both you and I felt like was kind of the best spot for him, because the issue with the Spurs was you do have Wemby, you'll have whatever else, but we don't know anything about what that team is going to look like, right? We already saw the Rockets make the playoffs, go to a 7-game series, and now it gets them closer, right? Because obviously OKC is at the top of the Western Conference, but once you got through that 2 through 8 spot, there's a lot of those teams are kind of similar. They're in a similar tier. Now, if you're Houston, you could put yourself in the upper part of that tier, where now you can say to yourself, all right, before we were a good playoff team that won 50 plus games, but we were unlikely to win a first round series unless we got maybe the right matchup. Now, right, you'll still probably be a good regular season team. Maybe Durant misses more time, so maybe they quote unquote lose more games. I don't know. But in the playoffs, right, you should be good to go because now you have a guy that you can play through offensively from the perimeter or other areas at the end of games, right? That's the type of player they kind of needed. And the best part is they didn't really have to, other than Jalen Green, give up any real guys from their core. Because with Jalen Green, when he got that extension, we talked about it. As soon as he got it, we were like, that's the type of contract that you give a guy where you're going to trade him at some point, right? It was a 3-year deal. The third year was non-guaranteed, and it wasn't a complete full max, right? It's still like $30 million or whatever it is a year. But the fact that, most rookies get a max extension for 5 years. He got 3. So obviously they weren't going to keep him. He had the series he had where he wasn't really great, right? I mean, they went 7 games despite Jalen Green offensively not really being that great for most of that series. And Brooks, he's a good player in his own right. He's a 3-and-D wing. He had a really good year this year. But, you look at it now, I guess now you could say you elevate Jabari Smith Jr. back into the starting 5, right? And in theory, hopefully he continues to get better. And Amen Thompson, right? He showed some real signs that he's going to be a star as he continues to get better. So you're going to have him. I'm going to assume they're going to bring back Fred VanVleet. I don't know if they'll just accept his team option or decline it and then re-sign him to a cheaper deal. But they should be really good. Untamed says if KD averages 22, 5, and 3, they'll be all right. I mean, what did he do last year? I mean, I think he still averaged what, like 26? Yeah, 20, 26, 6, and 4, 53 from the field, 43 from 3 in 62 games. So I think he can. I think this is a very good deal for Houston because, and especially if you're Durant, right? A team got you without really having to gut their team, because again, now Durant's in the Jalen Green spot. He's not a guard, so it's a different type of player. They'll probably have to find maybe some way to get some type of 3-and-D guard to replace Jalen Green, or maybe they'll just have a weird starting 5 where it's like Fred VanVleet and Thompson are your guards, but then Thompson's like a big guard and has some more ball handling duties. Because he's going to, in theory, if he's going to get better, you want him to get better by having him get more opportunities. So you could look at it from that perspective. And then the other young guys like Reed Shepherd, Cam Whitmore, they didn't really play a whole lot last year. So now they should. They should get more minutes. You're bringing back Steven Adams. Still have Şengün. Still have Eason and Jabari. So this team should be really good. So for Houston, I like it a lot. And I think this is the ideal type of package. Obviously, Durant, 37. So there's always the risk of, how much can he really give you at this point? But we saw him, right? He could still give you a lot. And, Houston, at least defensively, has a better infrastructure than Phoenix. So you're not in a situation where, Durant has to play elite defense in order for this team to be good. Like, he still can't be bad, but I think it'll help him and it'll help the team out because you're not asking him to do as much every single night, and I think he can still, on any given night, give you really good production. And, now you got a young athletic team that just got some playoff experience. So this is great for them. They traded a zesty shot chucker for a Reaper. Sounds like Nets Suns classic ending. But again, for Houston, it doesn't matter, right? Because look at the Pacers. They traded for Siakam and they got within one game of an NBA title. So, if you're Houston, to me, it's a no-brainer. You gave up very little to go out and get Kevin Durant. Now, if they had to have given up Jabari Smith Jr. or, Amen Thompson or Şengün, you'd say no. Actually, funny enough, they didn't even have to give up picks that they got from Brooklyn that were Phoenix's picks, right? Because Houston still has the Phoenix picks that Brooklyn got from the Durant trade when they sent him to Phoenix. So they didn't even have to get that. And that's where, like, when you look at Phoenix, KD is one shoe size away from 3 chips and over that. And that's the tough part about winning a title is a lot of things have to go right. That did not go right. But the problem is that I think at that point, right, Harden and Kyrie were still hurt. So that would have been
that. He was going to carry that team to the title, though. I don't care.
Yeah, but I get that. I'm just saying, like, that's the tough part. But that's why winning a title is so difficult because, and that's also why the 3-star build is done now because they got hurt and they weren't able to get as far as they could have gotten. But now with Houston, you have the depth, you have the star power, and you have the other guys that are going to get better. And they actually matched up well against OKC this year, at least in the regular season. Now, that's the regular season. We'll see what it looks like in the playoffs. But I love it for Houston. For Phoenix, it's tough because the last few years, right? I mean, what was it? It was like Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges and a bunch of firsts to go out and get Kevin Durant. And then you ended up trading him a few years later. And then what happens? Then you get back Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks. And then the number 10 pick. And it's just rough because for Phoenix, you had a championship level team. They went to the finals. They were 2 games away. But now that team is gone. Now in its place is a team that's probably still going to be a lottery team. At least you got the number 10 pick back. Maybe they use it to get a center. Maybe they use it to, draft a center. I don't know. Green, again, didn't have a great postseason, but he's still a decent player. But to me, if you're Phoenix, regardless, that's a lottery team. Like, I just, not being able to get anything outside of Dylan Brooks and Jalen Green, I just don't think Phoenix is going to be very good next year. I mean, maybe Booker will have a throwback vintage season, but it's not like he's bad. It's not like he's washed. It's just, you need a better group around him if you want to be a real contender. But I just don't think Phoenix is going to be that. But they were also operating from a position of weakness anyway, because, with Durant clearly, not wanting to be there anymore, and they were going to trade him anyway. And also, right, he had specific teams that he wanted to go to, right? And with him being in the last year of his deal, there just wasn't a whole lot of teams that could risk trading for him and then he's gone. Because you just don't know. You just don't know with him sometimes. But for Houston, he got to a team that he wanted to go to. And this was, I think, probably the best one of the 3. What were the other ones that were finalists? I think the Spurs eventually pulled out. It was Miami, right? And Miami didn't want to put the other stuff on the table to go get him.
Yeah, their offer was freaking disgusting.
Right.
It was like 3 role players and a pick.
Because they didn't want to put in, I think they didn't want to put all those guys. We knew that they didn't want to give up Khalil Ware, but then they also didn't want to give up, what were the other guys, like Jaquez, Jovic, and I think they mentioned Haywood Highsmith in the 20th pick, something like that. Yeah. And that's disappointing. And if you look at the East, I mean, again, you wouldn't pick them to come out of the East, but they could be decent. Now maybe they'll go get DeMar DeRozan or something. I don't know. But either way,
just gave me hives.
Like I said, for Houston, love the deal. Even with the 37-year-old Durant, I just don't care that much if I'm Houston because, again, you were good last year. I don't think you're going to be worse. And I mean, even if, you could be maybe, like I said, a couple games worse, but you're also looking at growth from the younger guys, right? This isn't a situation like Phoenix where it's a top-heavy roster with not a lot of defense or depth. This is a very different team. And then, like I said, for Phoenix, Jalen Green is okay. 10th pick is all right. I just think if you're Phoenix, you had a championship level team a few years ago. And that's kind of the tough part to swallow if you're Phoenix, even with the new ownership. Like if you're a Phoenix fan, kind of sucks now, I would say.
Yeah.
What do you think of this deal?
Yeah, somebody who watched, a decent amount of Phoenix basketball in the past few years, to see them fall from grace like that was freaking disgusting, right? It starts with the owner, very ambitious guy. You love the, win now mentality or whatever, but yeah, no. He I don't know. That definitely ruined a lot. You don't really just go out and get a guy like Bradley Beal and, hope and pray that everything works, right? Like that's just not how the NBA works. It's not 2K, it's not a fantasy. This is real life, and it's real ball. And I think with this deal, unfortunately, I want to start from Phoenix's perspective. The thing that I like the most that they got out of this, honestly, was Dylan Brooks. and I think that's a bad thing, right? Because I guess Green would be the centerpiece of what, you got in return. Not too high on the fit. I think, yeah, like Untamed just said, it says Green is most likely getting rerouted. Yeah, that's what I would do if I was Phoenix. I would move on from him, try and, maintain and get some role players, some quality depth pieces, right? Use the 10th pick to get a depth piece that will help Book in the long run, look at big man, all that stuff. Like they need to get a solid big man. They need to build up the wing depth. They need to build up depth all around. So that's what I would prioritize for them. Do they have assets to do that? Not a ton. Their hands are kind of tied, but at least this gives you a little bit of something. And Brooks obviously will give you, something on the defensive end and a little bit on the offensive end. So there is that. But
You might get traded to a high school team for a printer.
Jalen Green, great regular season player. I think we've kind of that's
like you can't work out great for Phoenix then.
Like we can't glaze over the fact that he had a pretty good regular season this year. Like there were inconsistencies, yes, but he was still very solid on the number 2 seed in the West, right? So I'm not going to discredit him there. It's the playoff stuff that really concerns me. It seemed like all his development kind of went out of the window. Nasty. So to transfer over to Houston, great job getting off of that. And then you bring in KD onto a team that already has the infrastructure to be, a contender, right? They were just missing, a guy to go to in the fourth quarter pretty much and, go to late in the game to pretty much give you certified buckets. We already know that that's what KD can do. You have a guy in Şengün who's pretty versatile. I think, we'd probably like to see him be a little bit better, rim protecting and stuff like that and defensively. But I think we already know. Yeah, right. Like he has gotten better over the years, but it could be a lot better. But that's why you have the double big. That team has a lot of length, size, all the stuff, athleticism. It's going to be a fun team to watch for sure now that they have a bona fide, superstar, legit guy who's, I wouldn't say past his prime, but, he's not the same like you talked about, right? But he'll still give you 50, 40, 90, giving you like 25 a game. So I think that's going to do a lot, right? And it opens up so many minutes for everybody. I'm expecting Tari Eason, I'm expecting Cam Whitmore, all those guys to, have productive minutes, and find some better roles, right, outside of what they were kind of forced into with a super young and crowded team, right? And I think it was good for Houston to also get rid of that 10th pick as well, right? Because, realistically, did you really need another young project to try and you didn't need another young project to kind of cram into an already very heavy young rotation, right? Like I think you've got a sense of who you want to build around going forward, and this will be a good run for the younger guys coming off the bench who didn't really play a lot last year, right? Like I think they like Tari Eason, what he provides on the defensive end. You like Jabari Smith, had a lot of timely buckets, did a lot on the rebounding and defensive end of things. Amin Thompson, like you said, certified potential. Şengün, definitely, a building block as well. So I think they have a very clear sense of what they want to do. And shout out to them for pulling off a finesse here, because that was not the return I was really expecting, if you want me to be honest.
Oh, yeah, sure. Because there was so much discussion about three team deals. Maybe Jabari Smith's in the deal.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the other guys like Reed Shepherd or Cam.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
And I think Untamed makes also another really good point. KD's going to open up he's saying Jabari Smith Jr., but that's the thing. He can help out those other guys too, because Now they have somebody that's not Jalen Green that's a little bit harder to just offensively take out of the game, right?
Yeah.
And then that's going to help out everyone else where now you have to play off Durant. And if you try to, do stuff with Durant, well, then, okay, maybe Amen Thompson will get some free buckets. Or maybe Jabari Smith Jr. gets some free buckets or Sengun. And now you don't have to just be like, all right, it's the Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green step back three show. You don't have to
Right.
see as much of that, now that you have Durant. Again, we'll see how far they get. But again, to me, if I'm Houston, this to me is just it's not really going to stun anyone. KD's usage is just right. And that's the nice thing is he's very much a plug and play guy where you don't necessarily have to take away from other guys in order to get him in there. And that's the nice thing about his game, that it's pretty adaptable and it fits in, I think, with a lot of guys. So like I said, and like you said, we both liked it for Houston, and that's why we thought this was the best team for him to go to. Just a matter of, from Phoenix perspective, what does that look like? ESPN, they had a funny post, I think, earlier today where it was like the Suns land. I think they used the term prolific young scorer in Jalen. And then they asked the question of how dynamic could those two guys, Booker and
Yeah, I
Green,
saw what you're talking
in the
about.
backcourt? Yeah, that was kind of funny to read earlier today. Again, you have to provide some type of angle from Phoenix. And again, like, I don't think Jalen Green's a bad player. Dylan Brooks is not a bad player either. It's just, if you're Phoenix, once you trade Durant, once you trade the superstar, you're not, you're just going to be in a different tier now, right? Like, the expectations now for Phoenix is not going to be championship or bust. It's going to be, can we make the playoffs at least next year? Can we get to the playoffs? Could we maybe win a series?
Yeah.
The expectations are lower now. It's just like I said, for Phoenix, it's tough because at one point they were there, right? People talked about Booker and Ayton as maybe the next Shaq and Kobe, right? There were discussions about like their core. Could they be a team that contends, goes to multiple finals, or makes multiple deep playoff runs? And it's all gone now. Phoenix last place team. I mean, they might be one of the worst teams in the Western Conference next season, right? Because
I agree.
when you look at the rest of the West, of course, there's going to be injuries. There's going to be teams that disappoint. So there's going to be teams where we're looking at them, and then as the year goes on, it's going to be like, yeah, they weren't as good as we thought, or guys are hurt. Then those teams end up disappointing. But I think for Phoenix, I'd be surprised if they were in the mix next year. Like, it wouldn't shock me. Like, unlike this year, it wouldn't surprise me if Phoenix is not that great. Even if they reroute Jalen Green and get else, Grayson Allen at center is going to be fun. Oh, man. It reminds me of the first year that we did this podcast, and I think we were talking about the Christmas games, and it was and it was a game between the Lakers and the Mavs, and it was a stretch when Anthony Davis was out, and they had a lineup where they had 5 guards in at one time. It was like Austin Reeves was the center, right?
Right.
Because they had the smaller guards where it was like Dennis Schroeder and Russ and Lonnie Walker together, and then it was like Austin Reeves and someone else, in that guard spot. And I was like, this is rough. We got a
Yeah, it's
5 guard
freaking
lineup
crazy.
out there, pretty bad. So maybe Phoenix might do something like that. They got a new coach, so maybe they'll figure that out.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So all in all, like I said, just before you close it out, just like I said, just shout out to Oklahoma City. Congrats to them being the NBA champions this year, one of the youngest teams to close it out. And they showed that this is not your typical young team, because we've seen a lot of younger teams. We saw this team last year kind of disappoint a little bit, and get upset in the series, losing to Dallas, right? Who was a lower seed, but had guys that were very experienced and super talented. And at that time, they had the best player in that series. But now Oklahoma City's improved. They're still super young, and they still weren't that experienced going into this. But, they added the vets with Caruso and Hartenstein. That happened to be pivotal and huge for their title run, right? Especially Caruso in the playoffs. And now they're in the annals of NBA history, where now they're NBA champions, and it'll be fun to see where Oklahoma City goes going. Not a fluke for sure. Congrats OKC, congrats to Shea and J Dub. They climb the all-time list. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like we saw the beginning of this. Like I said, the first year that we did this podcast, because they didn't make the playoffs, but Chet gets hurt. He gets hurt in that Pro-Am game, and he misses his first year. And we all just kind of assumed that Oklahoma City was going to tank, but they went for it. They went to the play-in with SGA, with Jalen Williams, and some other guys, right? I don't think that team didn't have a center at all because Chet was hurt. It was like the other Jalen Williams, Jay Will, who was like their starting center a lot. And then outside of that, there was no center. But, they went for it when everybody else thought they should tank. And then, that was kind of the foundation, even though they lost in the play-in. Then they're the 1 seed last year. Then they're the 1 seed again this year, but by a bigger margin. And now they're NBA champions. So we talked about it where, yes, young teams usually have to get through tough series. They have to get through real challenges. But we felt last year was the challenge. And I thought that they could progress a lot faster than a lot of people thought, as did you. And now they're here, and now they're NBA champions, and they have a real shot at continuing to be a force for a while. Of course, we have to see them do it, but there's no reason to suspect that they can't do it, because now they've been able to climb the toughest mountain, get the NBA title. Now you have to climb another tough mountain is to try to go back-to-back, which we have not had anybody do since the Warriors in 2017 and 2018. So we'll see what happens if they can do it. Again, Game 7 ended up being a little bit of a disappointment from an entertainment perspective after the second quarter, only because, OKC eventually showed their chops, pulled away, Halliburton was hurt. We didn't end up getting a classic 2016 or 2013 or 2010 Game 7. But either way, this OKC team, not a typical team, right? They are a great team, and congratulations to them for winning the championship. They're an awesome team, and they deserve all the credit in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Shout out to OKC, like you said, and shout out to Indiana as well. They gave us, I think, a great series. They gave us a great postseason, from the Eastern Conference perspective, right? Like entertaining moment after entertaining moment, upset after
One of my
upset.
favorite teams to watch.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Halliburton, one of my favorite players to watch as well. And, just shout out to them. They gave us, a show, upset after upset after upset. So, it was a great NBA season, and now we're kind of already looking at the next one, which is kind of scary, considering the draft is, right around the corner. And yeah, before we do head out, we appreciate, Untamed. We appreciate Keith Wells for, staying up with us and, keeping this live stream, pretty lively, I would say. So yeah, shout out to you guys because it was an amazing season. Great stream, boys. Thank you, man. We appreciate that more than you would ever know, man. But before we do get out of here, if you are new, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates. And we will see you guys on the next stream or live or episode, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.